Hi, Dr. Clark. I'm wondering about the second commandment and the acceptable interpretations of it as applied to images of Christ. It seems all images of Christ were considered a violation hundreds of years ago among Reformed Christians. Well, that is certainly true. And more than that, they were regarded as violations of the Word of God by the ancient Christians. The evidence for that is overwhelming. So go to heidelblog.net/resources and look for the resource page on images of Christ. And there's a lot of stuff there, a lot of quotations from the early fathers, or some important quotations from the early fathers. And there's just unanimous opinion until the 8th century. And the only reason it changed was by force, really. There's a wonderful summary from the iconoclasts during the fight between the iconoduals, those who used images in worship and arguably worshipped them or venerated them anyway, to be strict, although the line between worship and veneration is pretty fluid, it seems to me, and it's always seemed to the Reformed. And so you'd see that summary from the iconoclasts. It really summarizes the ancient Christian position very well, and it frankly summarizes the Reformed position very well. And the Reformed, as you indicated, were death on images. I'm holding here in my hand the venerable and much beloved Heidelberg Catechism, which, and I've read these for you before, but I'm going to do it again. It's the same stuff you find in the Heidelberg Catechism. What does God require in the second commandment? Question 96, that we in no way make any image of God nor worship him in any other way than he has commanded us in his word. By the way, that second part is the rule of worship, the regulative principle, nor worship him in any other way than he has commanded us in his word. So the only question we ask in worship is, what has God commanded? And the first thing that we infer from that is that we may not make images, because he has not only not commanded us to make images, he's commanded us not to make images. And as the early fathers said, God the Son did not become incarnate to make work for carvers and artisans. And that Bullinger quotes that in the Second Helvetic Confession, representing the Reformed consensus. Question 97 in the Heidelberg, may we not make any image at all? God may not and cannot be imaged in any way. As for creatures, though they may be indeed imaged, yet God forbids the making or keeping any likeness of them, either to worship them or to serve God by them, which is what people often say. They say, well, I don't want to worship them, I just want to serve God by them. And when the Reformed say, no, God has not commanded that. In fact, he's commanded the opposite. Question 98, but may not pictures be tolerated in the churches as books for the people? That's a reference to Gregory the Great, who at least was understood to have taught that images were to be used in the churches as books for the illiterate, as a kind of picture book, if you will. And the answer is no, for we should not be wiser than God, who will not have his people taught by mute idols, but by the lively preaching of his word. The Heidelcast! That's the Reformed consensus. And if you look at the Westminster standards, they're very, very clear on that as well. Just as clear, just as forceful against images. So the Reformed consensus is very strong on that. And more important, this is not just a doctrinal matter. This is a confessional matter in the churches. So the churches have read the Word of God. They've prayed over the Word of God. They've prayed for illumination of the Word of God. And with the ancient church, we have concluded that images of God the Son are forbidden, because to make an image of God the Son is to separate the two natures of Christ. You can't portray his deity. You're only attempting to portray his humanity, and in your portrayal of his humanity, you're relying on your own imagination, which is the definition of idolatry. Your imagination of God is not God. And so to use that in instruction or for worship or veneration or adoration or for piety is forbidden. And so he says, but continuing with Anonymous's email, in the last 100 years, he says, with the increased printing of children's books in general, it's become more accepted. I've become convinced that I do not want to expose my own 4 kids to these images. It's hard, of course, these days. Boy, it really is. That is where the single-sided razor blade an industrial razor blade, not the one that you take out of your shaving razor. That would not be smart. It'd be very risky. Just go, the same kind of thing you use for scraping surfaces and things, and just go to the hardware store. If you could find a good old-fashioned hardware store, otherwise go to the big box store, get an industrial razor blade, and then you can just slice those plates, as they're known in publishing business, those images right out of the story Bibles or whatever you're using with your kids, and then you won't have to deal with that. I don't think you should be worried about defacing books. Putting an ostensible picture of Jesus in a book is a much greater defacing of the book than you're removing that image from the book. But then he came across some quotes by our late beloved R.C. Sproul. He says, that made me wonder if I'm being too strict about it. He seemed to draw a distinction between art and idolatry in this quote, and he quotes R.C. I don't see anything that would prohibit that from being reproduced. Artistic creativity in the life of the church. I'm not sure this is a complete quotation, but I'm reading it as he sends it to me. But obviously, any use of art in church runs the risk of degenerating into idolatry. But I also think that the cure for abuse is not disuse. Historically, we have God adorning his presence with the beautiful, and I think that he has placed a pattern there, a principle there that remains forever. And a few other places. So that's the end of the quote. And then the writer says, and a few other places. I'm wondering if there has been more variety in how exactly to interpret the second commandment than I'm aware of in the Reformed Church, and if the idea of using images in children's books may be especially vague, obviously not human, very cartoony versions, is not actually a sin, but still better to be avoided so that it doesn't become affixed as a concept of how Jesus actually was, overly effeminate, Caucasian, bodybuilder, etc. Would love any history and your thoughts, and he gives the place where he finds the Sproul quotations. It's in a Stack Exchange website. So I disagree with R.C. here, and R.C. disagrees with his own confession in the Westminster Standards, which were received and imposed by his own denomination, the PCA, Presbyterian Church in America. So R.C. was taking a non-confessional, non-reformed, non-Presbyterian view of images there, and he's making, in effect, a medieval argument for images. So R.C.'s taking an exception there. I don't know if he took an exception before his presbytery. I imagine he did, but if he didn't, he should have. So I love R.C. He's been enormously helpful, beneficial. I'm not attacking R.C., but the truth is, obviously more important than our friendships. And R.C. was a friend. I can't say that we knew each other very well, but I've had dinner with him and spent some time with him and read him, endorsed his book on Roman Catholicism. And, I have a high view of R.C., but on this case, he was wrong. And I think it has caused some degree of confusion. And this is where our confessions really help us, right? We don't make our decisions based on what a famous person says, or even what you might find in a systematic theology somewhere. We make our decisions about what we believe on the basis of what the Word of God says, and what the churches confess, how the churches officially interpret the Word of God. And the Reformed churches have officially confessed a particular view. And so, no, as to the question of variety, diversity, no, you won't find among the Orthodox Reformed any diversity on this.